Welcome everyone. My name is Corinne and I will be your moderator this evening. I am so excited to welcome Penny Reed, Chief Growth Officer at eAssist, as our speaker tonight. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to go over some housekeeping. If you have a question, please type it in the box labeled "Have a Question" and we will answer them live at the end. CE is not available for this webinar, live or on demand. And that's it for tonight. So Penny, welcome. I'll pass it on over to you now and you can go through your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Corinne. Well, welcome everybody. Super excited to be with you. And as Corinne said, I'm Penny Reed. I'll give you a little bit of background about me before we get started. So I'm have been with eAssist Dental Solutions for a little over 2 years now. And prior to that time, for almost 30 years, I was an independent speaker and practice management consultant in the dental industry. And how I found eAssist was through referring clients to them that needed assistance with their revenue cycle management, outsourcing the dental billing. And so I'm very passionate about what I'm going to be talking about tonight. This was my wheelhouse. Still love helping practices grow and appreciate this opportunity. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit about eAssist, and then we're going to dive into what I like to call annual planning. Would be the short version of this topic. So eAssist, we were founded around 11 years ago. We have to date collected, or actually, posted on behalf of our clients, over $11 billion from insurance companies. And so I'll share with you a little bit more about what this can mean to you in your annual planning, and a little bit more about the eAssist services. Again, we are super proud of a lot of the accomplishments that we've made, Inc. 500, Inc. 5000, and we are the nation's #1 dental billing platform. And in addition to outsourced dental billing, we can also help with the patient portion, the credentialing, which for those of you that handle the insurance in the practice, if that's not right, then everything's off track from there. We can do your, on the platform, we can do your accounting, bookkeeping, can help keep your schedule full, lots of ways that we can support you. And I'll circle back to that at the end. But let's get down to the educational part. So here's what I hope that you'll learn today. I'm going to cover 7 dental practice goals to set to drive revenue and maximize profitability. I'm basing a lot of this out of a full day annual planning that I conducted year after year after year in person with clients. I'm going to share with you some of the big picture best practices there. I see that my little bullets all converted to the #1. So bear with me and just think #2 would be how to achieve and set your goals and track progress. The next one, which operational processes can be implemented to achieve your goals faster. So the first thing that I would have you do, whether you're doing this solo, if you're a practice owner and you're working through this on your own, or if you're involving your team, or perhaps you're an office manager, is to pause for a moment and celebrate what you've accomplished. If we really think about what we've been through the last 2 years, it's pretty phenomenal and incredible that we're able to get back to, let's say, business as usual, although I'm not really sure it will ever be the same. Yet we've gone from trying to survive back to being consistent and focusing on growth, and perhaps even looking a little bit towards innovation. And I've seen more innovation happen in the dental industry in the last 2 years than I have in the entire over 30 years that I've been involved in dentistry altogether. So celebrate those. They can be little things, right? Like how many days you were open this year. If you're fully staffed, they can be big things like accomplishing collection goals or implementing a new service in the practice. Maybe you bought a same-day crown type machine, an E4D, or maybe you began to place implants. So make that list. If you're making an agenda for an annual planning session, I would say you need to spend at least 10 minutes focusing on what those accomplishments are, because that's where we get the energy from to reset and look at how to move forward. And then the next thing that I would say, and this is not part of the 7, this is setting the context for these 7 things, is knowing where you are and having your key metrics. There's a program that I did for years and years called Dental Metrics and the Wizard of Oz. And you may think, what a crazy title. Well, here's where I came up with that. Too many numbers for people, usually after 15 or 20 minutes, unless you're a geeky numbers person, you tend to tune out. Or you may think, hey, what's in this for me, or what does this really mean? So I used a GPS symbol here. If you got in your car, hopefully you're not watching this while you're in your car. If you got in your car after this session and you wanted to go somewhere and you pulled up Google Maps, the first thing it would tell you is, here's where you are now. So look at not only where you are now, hopefully you have the numbers to look and see what your growth was for the previous year, but most importantly, where are you in terms of overall practice growth, production, collections, new patients, most important, profitability, right? We want to look at the overhead piece. Are we collecting everything that we should be? So the first would be, if you're planning your session, get your data together of what your production, collections, all the things that we're going to cover today. Be sure that you can notate where you are year to date, what it looks like you're on track to do for the year. Peter Drucker says, what gets measured gets managed. And I wrote a book quite a few years ago now called Growing Your Dental Business. And in there, I created a Penny Reed quote, which is sort of the opposite of Peter Drucker's. And that is, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed very well. So in order to really, and as we talked about in the outcomes for this program today, we really want to be sure that we've got tracking systems in place. These are part of the operational processes. Now, I've gone old school over here. Here's a calculator and a printout. I would say consistency is going to trump or going to override the fanciness of the tool, right? So whether you're using a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet, the consistency of tracking those numbers is going to override the tool that you're using. That being said, an analytics dashboard, something like Jarvis Analytics, saves you time and can allow you to track more frequently, easily, bring the entire team in. But you want to track, when we set these goals and goals for performance, daily, weekly, and monthly. And what that's going to mean is to be able to set aside time for the appropriate people to be able to look at those, report on those, the importance of having a morning huddle so that we can let the team know where we are on those certain metrics. So if you do not currently have a great way to track those sorts of things, then what I would say is, for example, if you're a Dentrix user, you can search and look in the blogs. What are the top 10 reports that I need to be running every month? Run those every month. Notate your information, and whether you use a ledger pad, Excel, or an analytics platform, be sure that you look at it regularly and talk with your team about what those numbers mean. So super important to have that. The other thing that I would recommend that you have, and most of you are probably looking at this and saying, what in the world is this? Well, you know what? I'm so glad that you asked. This is a poster board. It was a laminated poster board that when I would go into client offices, I would bring this with me and we would do a non-computerized project management system. So this is a basic type system that you could design in your practice to create. Maybe it's a whiteboard, but to have different columns. Now, I'm a techie. I love a project management system. So whether you use something like a free version of Trello, or maybe you use something like Asana, whatever project management system you use with your team, make sure it's easy enough to engage the team. So if you have one location and maybe a small team of 6, something like this on a wall with different colored Post-it notes by department can be super valuable. And it's something interactive, something engaging. For a larger group, maybe you have 4 locations, 7 locations, 20 locations, 50 locations. Obviously, for something like that, you would want a more technical type tool, something that's online that everyone can see. But when we set these goals and put things into place, systems into place, we want to be sure that we're assigning different individuals by department to track these, and then also looking at, and I know this because I overwhelmed clients for years and years, when you sit down with your annual plan and you come up with these ideas, you have way more ideas than what you could possibly get done most of the time in 12 months, let alone 6 months, 3 months, or even the next 30 days. So have a system where you can prioritize all these ideas that you'll have when you're doing your annual planning and put the ones that are the most important, either in process or up next. Put the other ones out 90 days, and maybe you have more columns. If it's more of a wish or a dream, it goes in the parking lot. And I always love for there to be a place somewhere on the end that says done or way to go or let's celebrate, so that we can have a little celebration when we check those things off. So have a project management system that can be super helpful. So as I mentioned earlier with the analytics and being able to track, I now want to get into one of the 7 ways to make 2023 your best year yet, and a certain type of goal that you would want to set. We usually started, not that we didn't look at the profitability or the income statement. That's something that we looked at every month. And yes, we looked at it at the end of the year. I would also recommend that you're looking at your income statement, P&L, on a rolling 12-month period as well. So we're looking at what, again, where are we? And then when we're setting our goals, we know what our overhead percentage is. We want to figure out, what do we need to collect in order to get to that next level? And then in order to know that, we also have to know what our net collections ratio is, meaning by the time we do our production, which we'll talk about next, depending on what plans we may participate with, after write-offs, what's the collectible amount of production? And then we've got to know how much we need to collect to be able to hit those targets, to be able to buy that next piece of equipment that we want, or build that building, or add the operatory. So what is the amount of money when we're looking at where we are now and where we want to be next year? Where do we want to set that target to give us what we need to hit that? So I would also, and we're covering quite a bit of information, an entire day, right, condensed into 45 minutes to an hour. I want to allow some time for Q&A. Also set goals around revenue cycle and make plans to improve your in-house systems or outsource what you can. So some of you may wonder, what is revenue cycle? We utilize that term on the business side of dentistry all the time. And I want you to think about, it's what begins from the moment that the treatment is rendered, right? We've delivered the treatment, it's been entered into the practice management software, and now we've created a bill, right? Now there is a debt that the patient and or through their insurance company owes to the practice for the services rendered. Well, I don't know about you, but if I do a day's work, that's something, that would be the expectation of the pay that I would get. One of the things that I've seen that is very different than it was when I first started out as a dental office manager a little over 30 years ago is that it's become more complicated, is probably the easiest way to say it, to collect everything that's collectible. And what happens in a lot of offices, especially when they're shorthanded, is they're so focused on most of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight that the whole how to talk to patients about the money conversation, how to be sure a claim is going out the door clean, how to be sure that we're following up on those, but those things go in the whole pile of we'll get to that when we have time. So I would also set goals around what your collection ratio should be versus what it has been. So it seems like a great time for us to do a poll, and this is completely anonymous. So what is your practice's collections percentage? All right, so take a moment, if you would, and enter on here so we can see where you guys fall in this curve. what is your practice's collection percentage? 98% or greater, 94 to 97%, 90 to 93%, or it's too painful for me to think about. So I'll give you just a little bit of time there. And so I'm going to utilize this time while those of you are voting. Here's what I've seen in conversations that I've had with dental practice owners is for those that are not achieving the 98% or greater, they've come to a place where they've begun to believe that it's not possible to collect the difference, right? It's just not possible. They're not going to be able to get the money from the insurance company. Or if the insurance company didn't pay what we as an office told the patient would pay, then you know what, the patient's not going to pay the rest of it. Or if they do, they're going to leave. We're going to get bad Google reviews. We've just gotten a little worn out with it. So let's see what you guys came up with. And then what I'm going to encourage you is it is possible to achieve that 98% or greater percentage. So, all right, we've got some high achievers here, 98% or greater, 94 to 97%, outstanding. So this frees you up to focus more on driving revenue. If you're 98% or greater, the 94 to 97%, I'll share some things with you at the end here, how we might be able to help you with that. So thank you. And super happy to see that no one selected it's too painful for me to think about. Usually sometimes someone does, just to be fun. All right, so let's set our financial targets or what we'll collect for 2023 and then reverse engineer it by month. So we'll do the annual goal. And then I highly recommend when you're looking at your months, if you've been in dentistry for a while, you know there are trends. There are certain months that tend to be higher than others. There are also going to be certain months where we may have more providers out for vacation. So we've got our annual target. We want to work backwards and reverse engineer that regarding what we'll need to produce, and also based on the number of days worked, number of provider days, how that will look production-wise. So one thing that I will encourage you before we get to the production part, I can't encourage you enough to have the conversations with your patients before they schedule treatment and have that discussion in your annual planning session and really look at the best way to know how well we're doing is to measure it. So if I put my consulting hat on and I ask the team, what percentage of the time are we getting the patient's payment, like their full estimated copayment or their entire amount that they need to pay before the treatment is rendered? Often I'll hear offices say, oh, almost every time. And so one of the best ways to look at this would be to, in a team meeting, look at the previous day and look to see who came in and how much they actually pay. There are a lot of computer reports that will tell you what your over-the-counter collections are. So I would also suggest that you raise the bar about when you have those conversations. The best time to have the overall conversation is before the treatment is scheduled. Then when the patient comes in to have the treatment done, I would encourage you to, in a very positive way, you can say something like, hey, Jim, so great to see you. Dr. Smith will be with you in just a few moments. Before we get you to the back, for your convenience, I can go ahead and take care of your payment now, right? So it's for your convenience. It's for their benefit. It also tells us whether or not they're prepared to do what we talked about when they made the financial agreement. So that is a great way if you are in that not quite 98% or above. If you start there, that can be super, super powerful with your plan. All right, so the next would be set your production goals, both gross and net. And one of the mistakes that I made, I love to share, I learned from my mistakes. Hopefully you can learn from them too. In my first few years of consulting, when the PPOs really came on the scene, I was used to helping offices set that overall production goal, but we didn't take into account what may happen with some of the PPO write-offs. So we would set that big picture goal. We wouldn't factor in what the true net production would be, based on what the write-offs were. And I'll give you some tips about how I would recommend that you bill those things starting in 2023 if you're not already. And so we've got to look at that. So let's just say, for example, that your gross production to net production after you factor out the write-offs, maybe our net production is only 89% of what the gross production is. So depending on what is showing up in your production reports for your practice management software, you may have to go in and factor that in, meaning we look at the collections goal, then we look at, okay, well, if we're at a 98% net collections ratio, what do we do to factor in the actual collectible production based on those write-offs? So that's something that you definitely want to take a look at. Here's the tip that I would recommend. Most of your practice management software has a feature that if you have a contracted plan, again, I want to emphasize this is for contracted plans, you always want the full fee on the insurance claim. You want the fee schedule fee on the ledger for a variety of reasons. One is it helps minimize the write-offs on the back end. And if your fee schedules are updated, which they should be, it should be something that's ongoingly happening in the practice, and then at least once a year, getting with the payers and making sure that you have that. It will show you every day, again, the full fees going out on the claim, but it will show you what your actual collectible production is. And I would contact your practice management software if you're not already doing that already. It gives you a clear picture of what's on the scoreboard every day instead of seeing only that gross number and then at the end of the month being disheartened, because obviously if you're writing things off, you're not going to be able to collect 100% of the gross production. If you're out of network and that's working for you, keep on doing it. That's awesome. All right, so the next thing that we'll do once we get the production goal is we want to do a breakdown of what that looks like by department. And I wanted to use this as an example. I'm sure we have practices of all different specialties on here this evening. The vast majority of the practices out there are general practices or practices that do have a hygiene department. So I thought I would use this as an example. We want to set, and this is not to scale, I'll talk about some percentages in a moment, our goals by our hygiene department, by our operative restorative department. And let's say that you do offer a specialty service in your practice like ortho, you would want to have a separate goal for that as well. So for most practices, and I'm going to give you a range, the hygiene department should be producing around 35% of the overall practice production. Now that's going to vary in some practices where we're doing a lot more implants and cosmetic type cases. It could be a little bit lower. In some practices where maybe we've got more, we're more PPO involved and maybe we're in a more blue collar area, that percentage could be a little bit higher. So what I would always encourage you to do is, again, know where you are, like the GPS, and look at what you've been trending. And that's a great place to start. Now, let's say your hygiene department production is lower than what you'd really like for it to be. Then let's say it's at 25%. Well, could you go from 25% to 35% in 12 months? Possibly. Yet it might be better to have a more doable goal to say, okay, if we were to increase that to where the hygiene department's doing 30%, what does that look like? And then when we talk about another one of the 7 goals that you want to set, I'll share with you how you know if you've got the capacity to get that done. So then your operative department, and in this example, I've excluded ortho, that would make up the vast majority of that other portion. So if 35% was hygiene, then probably 62, 63% would be operative. And depending on how much ortho you have, that could be 2%, 3%. If you're a general practice doing ortho or a pediatric practice doing ortho, a lot of that's going to vary based on the number of orthodontic patients you have, as well as the capacity, because we need a lot more chairs when we're seeing ortho patients. So whatever your departments are, I would list those out. You might even want to list, and I've got another goal a little bit later as far as some specialty services, whatever works for you. If you're doing Botox or Juvederm, if you're in a state that allows for that to happen and you have that in your practice, then I would have an aesthetics category as well. So we want to set those production goals once we've done it by department. We also want to set those goals by provider. So a lot of that, again, is going to have to take into account not only how many providers we have, but how many days a week that they work. So you would take your department goals, divide those by the number of provider days scheduled for the year. And then there's some other things that may need to come into play. If we have a dentist on the team that's been practicing for 30 years and an associate that's been practicing for one, they likely have more of a capacity to be able to do more. So their production goals may be more. But we want to be sure that we're not only counting provider goals, but also based on their number of days worked. Okay, so I want to pause for a moment. So we've talked about setting those collections goals, also looking at that collection percentage that we have. And I would say that's a great conversation with the team. And again, in looking at the numbers, how much of that is over 90 in your insurance? Your insurance over 90 days for most practices, other than ortho, right? That's always going to be an exception because those, depending on how we're billing that out, that treatment is ongoing. And in some practices that may not be set up to where only the monthly amount due is showing up on the AR. But your over 90 days insurance should be at zero or near zero or trending down. And as I mentioned earlier, I think for a lot of us, we've gotten a little calloused. We look at that over 90 category and we say, some of that, it just takes a while, right? It takes 6 months, it takes 12 months. And occasionally that's true. Yet if you've got the experience and the practice and the expertise, and most importantly, the time, the administrative support, we found it can be done in much less time. The other is, if there's a patient balance after the fact, the longer that claim ages, if the patient hasn't already paid everything they're going to owe, we also have a low likelihood of getting that from them as well. So mastermind as a team, how you can handle that internally, or it may make sense to outsource. And again, I'll share more on that later. So I have 2 daughters and I love them dearly. They're both very different. And most parents would never admit if they had a favorite child. I hesitate to admit that I have a favorite practice management system, not software, but practice management protocol or thing that I like to teach. If I had a favorite, this would be it. And that is case acceptance. So other than your fee schedules that you get from your insurance companies, or if you're out of network, you're getting your full fee, that's definitely a way to work smarter, not harder. Another way is to make the most out of every single phone call that comes into the office, converting that into an appointment, evaluating the patient, presenting that treatment effectively, having the financial discussion, getting the treatment scheduled, and then getting the treatment completed and paid for. So the bottom of the funnel is where, that's where the rubber meets the road, getting that treatment scheduled and getting it paid for. So for a lot of practices, when they're looking at how do we grow, right? We set the production goals, yet we may not look at what our case acceptance really is. And I have a theory. I'm going to get a drink of water here. Part of that is because that number is a moving target. And if any of you have ever been in sales, or maybe you have a spouse or a friend or a partner that's in sales, it can be manipulated, right, if you don't have a standard by which you go by. So I'm going to give you a couple of different ways to calculate it, and then share with you just a few tips on some things that you can do to improve upon and increase it. I do want to go back to the whole what gets measured gets managed, and simply by beginning to measure this, it will begin to get better because we're tracking it and we're more focused. So the treatment presentations, we need to be sure that we have adequate time scheduled for that. So that can be a conversation for a goal to improve upon if that's something that you feel like you're not having. And then also, how do we engage the patients more when we're having those discussions? So tools like intraoral camera. You should have an intraoral camera at every chair. So that would be an item to budget for in your planning. If a team member has to go and find it, or if the ones that you have are not working, they won't really use it. So if we want to engage the patient, we want to bring them into the experience of the case presentation, sort of like how Disney and Universal Studios do with riding the rides, then we want to be sure that we have those tools. So let's talk about the measurements for case acceptance. The first thing that I would, and the most accurate, like the one that never, like you can never maneuver the stats, would be to measure the case acceptance by dividing the total operative production by the number of diagnostic evaluations, so comprehensive evaluations, periodic evaluations, emergency evaluations. So if we're producing in operative $100,000 a month, and we were doing, let's see, what would be a reasonable amount? 300, right? 300 evaluations. We would say $100,000 divided by 300, and that number would be our average dollar value per exam, like for all of the exams. So if we can produce more per exam, then we know that our existing patients are accepting more treatment, right? If they both continue to rise, that's great. But you've got two standards there that you can't vary or deviate from. We'll hear offices sometimes say, oh, well, our case acceptance is 90%. Well, if you're presenting 3 different treatment plans, right, and to keep it simple, let's say tooth number 3, it's not salvageable, right? So we're saying, we can extract it. I'm saying it's not salvageable. It definitely needs a restoration, like it needs help. So either we can extract it and do nothing, which is not ideal. We could do a root canal, a buildup in a crown, or we could extract it and do an implant. And so a lot of offices will say if the patient chooses one of those, one case presented, one case accepted. And in some ways that is true. And so I don't want to say don't measure that at all. Yet if we're presenting, those are 3 very different dollar value treatment plans. So one may be $180, another one may be $2,500, another one may be $4,500. So there's so many different variations of that. That wouldn't be the ideal way that I would measure it. Neither would I presented this many cases and this many were accepted. And overall as a team, we want to look at every single month, this is what we produced, run your report of production, procedure report to look to see how many of your D0, 120, 140, 150, how many of those total you did. Then that gives you a number. I would jot that down every month and work as a team to improve upon that. So for your annual planning, I would run it year to date, operative production year to date, divided by the total number of evaluations, let's say through November, if you're watching this live, and then that gives you a number, and I would look to improve that by a certain percentage, right? So maybe that's 10%, maybe it's 15%. This will give you a greater ROI because this does not involve adding additional team members, doing more marketing, or adding another operatory, all right? This is one of the best ways to work smarter, not harder, and make 2023 your best year yet. So I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the pie chart, dividing the goals up by department, that you might want to set, maybe it's ortho, maybe it's clear aligners, maybe it's implants. Look at the specialty services that you're doing. And again, this is about an extreme focus on an area of growth. So whether it's a clear aligner program that you've implemented, or, once again, maybe the doctors have gone and done some implant training, or they've done sedation training, or you follow me here, they've been to one of the, elite postgraduate programs to learn how to do, complete smile makeovers. So I would look specifically at 1 or 2 of those specialty service areas and look to see where what you've done year to date, and then look to see where you want to go. Because one of the other things about a lot of these specialty services, maybe not all of them, But the ones especially that are cosmetic related, many of them, if it's not covered by a plan, they're more profitable for you. Or in a case like implants, there may also be some medical coverage there, and it could be easier for the patient to say yes, right? Because they've got some other coverage assisting them. So look at specialty service goals as well. And we're going to cruise on over here to number 5, same day treatment goal, same day service. And clients used to ask me, about, well, what do we do? Should we save time for emergencies? I'm going to give you my 2-minute philosophy on scheduling. And I highly recommend, when you're overall planning out both your hygiene and your operative schedule, especially operative is what I'll speak to right now, that you pre-block for your higher production appointments, meaning you've got, and this depends on, again, your average dollar per restorative appointment. It could be 3 appointments a day. It might be 5 appointments a day, depending on what a high production appointment looks like in your practice. So let's just say 3 for the sake of the example, 3 possibly per doctor. So if we've got Dr. Smith here and he needs 3 high production appointments a day, we've pre-blocked those in a way that makes the most sense for him, and also for the office. So maybe one of them's right before lunch, maybe one's right after lunch, one could be end of day, or you could have a couple of them stair-stepped, right, wherever those go. So we have a goal that we're working to achieve. We have our big rocks are marked off, for times on the book that we don't fill those with lower production until, the day before the appointment, or maybe even the day of, right? You wouldn't hold a 8 a.m. appointment until the day of, because you wouldn't have time to fill it. Yet every day in the practice, from what I've seen, almost without fail, there are open opportunities on that schedule that we didn't plan for, right? Things come up for people. Goodness knows we've been through all sorts of healthcare issues as a nation that could cause people to change appointments. Yet for most practices, if they're lucky, at any given time, there are 5, 10 other patients that may be in the office during that open time. So in the morning huddle, being aware who's in the office today that has treatment that hasn't been scheduled, or maybe they're scheduled for treatment today, but they have additional treatment that could be done, right? And then also, having the hygiene team be aware, here are the openings that we have today. So this is not about how many people can we squeeze in during the day when we already have a full schedule, because long-term, that's not a great solution. What will wind up happening is the ones that were already scheduled won't have a great experience, and it can wind up hurting your brand and your reputation. Yet for that open time that's on the schedule, we want to have a goal, right, to say, and it may be that you're looking at, based on the number of hours of open time that you have, how much time that you filled. That would be one way to do it. Another way would be, because it can be simpler to focus on a number than a percentage, is, okay, everybody, let's set a goal to at least identify 2 or 3 a day in the huddle. Okay, if something happens and we have open time and we're looking at this for the next day, who's someone that we could say, hey, Joe, let's talk about this bridge that the doctor diagnosed 2 years ago on the upper left. How's that area feeling? I'm noticing that it looks like there's a little bit of a drift going on because that space isn't closed. And I'm curious what may be preventing you from moving forward with treatment, and, start that dialogue. And perhaps it's a financial conversation, or maybe it's I'm so busy. I just don't have time. So we could say, well, if we were able to do it today, I can check if that is something we were able to do today, and we can have Susan, our financial coordinator, talk with you. Is that something that you might be willing to do? So if every day we at least have a goal of identifying, again, whatever you think is best for you in your practice, maybe it's 1, 2, 3 different opportunities, and have those conversations if we have the open time on the schedule. and then, sort of declare who those may be, right? Or how many those are. Then at the next day we can look at, hey, we weren't able to do any because we didn't have any open time, or we were able to schedule 2 patients, move them over to operative, or have 2 patients that were already in operative, and we were able to add that on. So that is another great way. And hopefully your schedule doesn't ever fall apart. Yet in the moment, if it happens on short notice, the best place to find a patient to fill that is right there in the office. And we all know, unfortunately, once that time is gone, it's gone. And then that just puts more tension on us to make up for it later on. So same day treatment goal. And it's way more convenient for the patients. I think for a lot of them, they're not wanting to have to take off work, trying to figure out who's going to pick up their kids from school if they have a dental appointment. So, all right. So we're moving right along. Number 6, setting goals for new patients. Hopefully you already have them. And also goals for referred patients. So set a goal for total new patients, meaning new people that have never been into the practice before. I'm going to give you a benchmark for the next one. Then a goal for your comprehensive evaluation. So a rule of thumb, and this is going to vary based on what the value of a new patient is in your practice, but a good rule of thumb, per doctor, you should have 25 comprehensive evaluations per month. Now, if you have more, that's fantastic. If you have fewer, yet you're able to hit your goals, that can be okay too. One of the main things to remember, and now we're to the new patients, and then next I'll be talking about hygiene, and we're talking about how to make 2023 your best year yet. Yet I also, because, in my heart, I'll always be a coach for dentists and their teams, and for you guys as practice owners that are on here and team members all working together towards the same goal. New patients and hygiene patients are what fuels the practice, right? Those are the gas pedals. And then, of course, tweaking the case acceptance is making the most out of what's coming into the office, right? So we want at least 25 comprehensive evaluations in most cases per doctor, because at some point in most practices, we're looking to grow and possibly expand, and having an adequate number of new patients coming in and then going through the hygiene department, as well as having a successful and profitable hygiene department, is key to being able to have enough work to bring on another doctor. So that's something to have in the back of your mind. And that may be a conversation also that you want to have in your annual planning is, are we ready? Could we benefit from having another dentist in the practice? All right. So the other would be setting a goal for increasing referrals. If you aren't already, I would set a standard and maybe have someone on the team check it every week or once a month. Every patient that gets entered into the practice management software, every new patient, there should be a human being or a referral source that's not a human in the referred by line. So maybe if you have a billboard, it could be billboard. They may say, I saw you on your website, or maybe you've run an ad and you know that that's where they came from. Or maybe they came from Bill Smith or Joe Jordan or, Mary Sue Jones, your existing patients. It's important to know where those are coming from. And if you have a goal for patient referrals, then let's look at what we've averaged this so far this last year. And for example, let's increase it 10%. Patients of record are still by far your best vehicle for growing your practice when it comes to new patients. It doesn't mean that we don't advertise. It doesn't mean that we don't market. Don't overlook that because it's very, very powerful. And with some focus, it can be a great addition to your advertising and marketing plans. All right, number 7, again, as I mentioned, gas pedals, new patients, hygiene. Look at your recare effectiveness rate in the practice, meaning calculate the percentage of active patients who are active in hygiene. Here's how to do that. You would figure out, number 1, how many active patients you have. This is different than how almost every dental software computes it, because the dental software is saying this patient is flagged because you tagged them inactive. If not, they're active, right? Those are pretty much the choices. There's not necessarily a sensory acuity going on with the software to say, okay, well, these are the ones that have been in the last 18 to 24 months. For years, I identified an active patient as a patient that had been in the last 24 months. Over the last decade, there have been some really cool analytics programs that have come out, and they say an active patient is a patient that's been in 18 months. Pick one and stick with it. If you're using an analytics platform that says 18 months, then use that one. All right. So how many actual patients have been in the office the last 18 months? Let's say it's 2,000. All right. Then we want to look at what percentage of that, how many patients have we seen in hygiene? Well, if we have 2,000 active patients and on average a patient comes in twice a year, that would be 4,000 potential hygiene recare visits. If we've only seen 2,000, right, 2,000 recare visits divided by 4,000 potential, we're at a 50% recare effectiveness, which is pretty good, right? When you're in the overall scheme of things, the average annual stat from what I've heard, without really putting a focused effort is around 30 or 33%. We want to have as many, if we have a general practice or a pediatric practice, we want to have as many of our patients active in the hygiene department as possible because number one, it keeps them healthy, which is a win for the patient. The other is it keeps them engaged, which is a win for the patient and a win for us, and also helps feed ongoingly the operative schedule. So I would set a goal wherever you are, right? Unless you're at 80% or 85%, it's usually interesting. Most offices think that they're more effective at this than they are. So again, the stars may lie, but the numbers never do. So I would look at that and then look at how do we want to increase that? So let's say that we identified, all right, we want to increase that we want to get 50 more recare patients in per month than what we have done. Well, now we go back and we look at our provider schedule. Do we have the capacity to be able to deliver that? Now, if you only had 50 openings, period, that may not be, quite realistic because if you think about it, whether it's a church or a concert venue, usually things are not quite at capacity to where everybody's elbow to elbow. It may be close. But if you want to be able to deliver that, be sure you've got it on the shelf. And so that may be where we're looking. And I know that it's been tough. But if we want to expand that, especially if we already have the space, maybe we say, hey, we want to add another day of hygiene per week next year, or maybe we want to add another full-time hygienist, right? So that would also be something that we would want to look at, want to plan for, and add to that list so that we can begin focusing on building up, the volume to be able to support another provider. So hygiene recare goal. All right. So in just a moment, we'll open it up for questions. I wanted to begin to put the pieces together, and I'm happy to answer to the best of my ability any stat questions that you have, anything related to revenue cycle or, tips to improve upon that. But when we put it all together, and again, as I mentioned, my book was called Growing Your Dental Business. That's really where my focus was as a coach. That's where most of what we've talked about today is on that driving revenue side. And for me, again, what I found was if there were things, especially for the administrative team, where we couldn't find someone that really knew how to do dental billing and do it effectively. We wanted someone with experience. There were not a lot of people out there. Or maybe we needed to add another team member in the office, or we just weren't getting the results that we wanted. Our accounts receivable was higher than what it was. I want to encourage everyone on here, if you're not achieving that 98% net collection level or greater, that it's time to raise the bar. Whether you do that in-house and figure that out in-house, that's fantastic. Yet if you're not, that's how I became engaged with eAssist in the first place. place was I found that it was a very solid, predictable relationship that my clients had with the eAssist Dental platform and the success consultants that work there to become virtual team members and help solve those problems and get those claims paid. And then that frees you and you guys in the office up to be able to focus on the patient that's in the chair, increase that case acceptance, be sure the schedule's filled, monitor your numbers. So, you deserve it. So I would encourage you to raise the bar, whether you do that internally or externally. And before I open it up to the Q&A, let's go ahead and do this poll, and then we can focus strictly on the questions. If you are interested and would like to have someone from the Henry Schein team reach out to you to schedule a consultation regarding eAssist Dental billing services, you have an opportunity to let us know that now. And I'll leave this up for a moment before we move into the Q&A. So if you would like that, I know that we've got business development team members that would love to have a conversation with you, happy to help you. And if not, my hope is that you got value for being here as well, and that you got some tips and some pearls to help you have the best year ever for next year. So I'll leave that up for another second or two. Hopefully you guys are continuing to fill up the queue with some questions. So now it's time for Q&A. And let me go ahead and get that open here. Let's see. It looks like we've got Danang has a question about the industry standards or benchmark for hygiene recare goal. So great question. As I mentioned earlier, usually when we would go in, or when consultants go in and look at a practice, one that really hasn't been making concerted efforts, it's been around 33%. For a high performing practice, it's going to be 65% or greater of your active patients are active in the hygiene department. And one of the things that, if I can give a tip or two here, because I know right now we don't have a ton of questions, which is okay, is that standard begins at the patient's first visit, and it's reinforced every time they come into the office. So we can solve a lot of that by, at the first visit, the hygienist, when the doctor is in the room, says, hey, Penny is here. She's from Charlotte, North Carolina, tells me a little bit, tells the doctor a little bit about me, and then begins to talk about, things that are going on with my oral health and what my goals are. And then there's the point that comes to, and I've mentioned to Penny, and I know that you will confirm what is ideal, that it looks like having her come in every 6 months is the best recare sequence for her. And the reason for that is blank, right? Number of restorations. We found overall that's what what we need for our patients to be healthy, or maybe it's less than that. But it's that conversation and the patient understanding that, doctors, this is what you want, versus we get worn out with the insurance companies being in control, right? Yet we use the whole, well, the insurance company will pay for you to get your teeth cleaned twice a year. The patient needs a reason other than, oh, well, I get 2 free cleanings, so it's sort of like a perk. They need to understand, the value, the oral cancer screening, all the reasons, things that we're looking for to identify, and how it helps them be healthier because they have more opportunities to be taken care of. So hopefully that answered the question about the hygiene goal. And okay, what is the industry standard or benchmark for treatment acceptance? Great question. So I'm going to go, Danang, back to what I mentioned earlier, and really the only standard that I would use, and this goes for a lot of areas in the practice. The best benchmark for you to aim for is the one just beyond where you are, right? The greatest competition for your practice really is within our own 4 walls. Like, it's for us to continue to improve upon where we currently are. So I would, in running the numbers, and I've seen this all over the place, it depends on what type of practice you have, but let's say that when you do the math and you divide your operative production by the number of evaluations, maybe that number winds up being $245, which I would say is on the low end. But let's say that that's where that is. And we identify that that's what it's been for the last year. Then my next level benchmark would be, to increase that, and we could talk about it as a team, maybe it's 280, maybe it's 300. And then looking at, okay, well, once it's 300, how much higher, could it be? So what have I seen, which may be different than an industry standard, because I don't believe as an industry we've been tracking it that way. I first heard of that measurement and it really stuck and made sense about 6 or 7 years ago. I have seen in work that I had done with clients where that could be $500, $600, $700. So the other thing that's going to impact that, it also is PPO plan participation. So if you are participating with a lot of them, that will be lower. If you are participating with PPOs and you've not worked with a PPO negotiation service, simply by doing that and getting some of your fees raised, you can up that dollar value per evaluation. So hopefully that's helped. Okay, Corinne, I don't see any more questions. There may be another question or two that rolls in. So I'm popping up this contact slide, and I will turn it back over to you unless there's a last minute question that comes in, and we can land the plane here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Penny, for the wonderful presentation and for taking the time to be with us this evening. We truly appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We did record tonight's webinar and will email the recording out sometime in the next week. So if you want to refer back to anything, you certainly can. We also would appreciate your feedback via our survey that will pop up on your screen shortly. And with that, I don't see any more questions. So I think it's time to wrap it up. Thanks again, Penny. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Corinne. It was great to be here. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Have a good night.